You've all been in Congress for a year, and we want to hear about that, but first, we want you to tell us a little bit about yourselves, about your district, and the moment or the issue that made you decide that you wanted to run for the House of Representatives. So, Congressman Pompeo, I'll start with you.
Great. Thank you, Cleta. It's great to be here this afternoon. I'm Mike Pompeo. I represent South Central Kansas. It's a district centered on Wichita, where we build most of this country's great airplanes. The thing you should know about me, perhaps foremost, is that I am a deep believer in small government and freedom. It's why I decided to run for Congress. I went to West Point, and I served on active duty for a little over 5 years. Thank you. I then went to Harvard Law School, although I don't talk about that as much in Kansas. And then had a real opportunity to start 2 small businesses in Kansas. So I spent the 16 years before I came to Congress, now 14 months ago, running 2 manufacturing companies that employed hundreds of folks here in the United States of America. I decided to give up my day job because, like you've heard from so many speakers here, I became truly deeply concerned about the direction our country was headed. With a government this big, there's just not enough room for freedom and individualism. And I've got a son, Nick, who's 21. He's probably not out of bed yet. But I care deeply about that next generation. That's why I decided to do this.
Congresswoman?
Thank you. I'm Anne Marie Burkle, and my district is the 25th District of New York. And I decided, I am a registered nurse. I'm the mother of 6 children. When I was 40 years old, I went to law school and for many years represented a hospital in upstate New York. So I watched the progression of what was going on in the last Congress, and I watched Dodd-Frank and the stimulus, and it was for me the health care law, the terrible assault on our freedom with the health care law that really propelled me into running for Congress. And I am the first, my parents were the first generation Italian Americans, and I knew deep in my father's soul that he understood. He was the hardest working man I know. And he knew deep in his soul that this country offered opportunities that no other place on this earth offered. And so in an effort to preserve those freedoms for my kids and my grandkids, I have soon to be 13 grandchildren, I ran for Congress. So it is about, just as my colleague said, it is about preserving and protecting the United States of America. Congressman?
Well, thank you. Tim Hillscamp from Kansas, and I think I speak for my colleague from Kansas. We want to apologize at the beginning of this that Kathleen Sebelius was our former governor. And no disrespect to us, but the reason I ran it is very clear. I have 4 young children, 4 adopted children, and for decades now, this country, our people have been under attack. Our liberty is under attack, whether it's coming after our families, coming after the culture, coming after the issue of life, coming after our businesses. It's not just the current administration. It has been decades of folks in this town that have attacked our way of life, which is why when I go out and do town halls, I ask the question, do you think the American dream is still alive? This is in western Kansas. I'm a farmer. We're optimistic. 2/3 of the folks in my district say, you know what, Tim? The American dream is in jeopardy. This is the first generation in America where people wonder whether the next generation is going to be better off. That's why I ran. That's why we're here today, and I appreciate the time to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so let's get to some of the questions that Americans are wondering about the Tea Party freshman who came to Congress a year ago. You've been in Congress a year. What do you wish you'd known a year ago that you know now? What is the one thing that you would tell us you have learned the most about this first year and the challenge of being a member of the House of Representatives? So let's start with you, Congresswoman.
Well, you know, we came down here as freshmen, and many of us, as you just heard here, we're not career politicians. We came down here with a mission. So you come down here just as you're all fired up. We have got to change things. So you get down here and it's like you hit a wall. I mean, that's the reality of what the feeling is sometimes because we in the House recognize what we need to do in terms of regulations and getting the government out of the way of our economy and making the changes. And we pass these bills with the House majority, and then they go to the Senate to die. Same situation with the budget, same situation with so many initiatives we've taken. And that's the frustration for me, and the surprise that I had was I thought we could do more. But what it does is it illustrates for me and for us the importance of taking back the Senate and taking back the White House in 2012.
Tim? I get asked the question at home, was Washington everything you thought it would be? I said, oh yes, and much worse. You know, and you look around this town, and oftentimes I'll say it's not a partisan issue. It's a establishment issue. There are folks, you know, under this administration, another $5 trillion of debt in about 4 years. Not much more than the last administration over the last 8 years. The problem in this town is folks that don't understand the American dream. It's like you come to Washington, D.C., and you can see it. It doesn't take long where suddenly you're a really smart person. And you hire folks that tell you you're a smart person, and all of a sudden you start to believe that the American dream starts here. Now, today it's ending here. And just to see the extent of that, it's really concerning to me, which is why elections are so important. That's why we should require folks who are running for office, tell us what your solutions are. Tell us what your vision is, not what the other guy is for or against. That's important as well, because we need to hold folks accountable in both parties, because when we're writing a $16.4 trillion debt, that's going to be what our children and grandchildren owe. That's concerning to me to see how folks are not so urgent about solving that problem.
Congressman Pompeo, what do you wish you'd known a year ago when you first were sworn in, so that you could have known that all this first year? What is it?
You know, I wish I'd listened to my friends who said, "Hey, keep running that business. That's a lot of fun." Look, this is hard work. These issues are difficult. So in our first 4 weeks, you hear these folks. In our first 4 weeks, we voted to repeal Obamacare, just like we said we would. And this class of freshmen has truly kept that at we are all talking about the very things we campaigned on. In that same week that we did that, I was at a hearing. I sit on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and Lisa Jackson, the head of the EPA, came to testify. I knew we were in trouble, but I had no idea the extent of the disconnectedness of that agency from the real world. She talked about how jobs didn't matter and how her regulations were actually going to create jobs. So if you said, what did you know? I knew it was bad. My company was regulated by the EPA. I had no sense for the magnitude of the disconnect. And I'd finally add this. When I went back and looked at the rules under which Ms. Jackson was operating at EPA and said, how did we get here? Most of the statutory authority was given to her under Republican administration. And so we have got a long, big mountain to move. And the conservative movement has got to take the lead in moving that mountain.
Well, let me ask you this, along those lines. Is there, and Congressman Hillscamp, you were a member of the Kansas legislature before you came to Washington. So you have been in a state legislature and know something about legislating. Compare your experience in the state legislature and how things work compared to Congress. Are there things that the state does better? Are there things that are worse? What could we learn from the states? What would you say about how to fix some of the things that Congressman Pompeo just talked about?
Great question. I think I speak for my colleagues. It's never ending. There's never a solution. It's like, well, we'll do that tomorrow. There's 4 magic words I've learned that I put in my vocabulary for 2012. It's after the next election. We're going to solve the entitlement problem. We'll do that after the next election. You know, we're going to tackle spending. Well, we'll do that after the next election. You know, what I see is we tend to put off today. Doing the right thing today for fear it costs us election tomorrow. And that doesn't work that way. That's not what the founders did. And that's what I see is different than the state legislatures. They got to get something done. And there's a responsibility. But up here, it's always somebody else's problem. And that's what happened when we had this debt deal back in August.
Talk about that. Talk about your experience. All 3 of you were involved in that. This was something conservatives all over the country were watching. Tell us the behind the scenes, what was going on, and the pressures from both sides, and just tell us what was going on and what happened and why.
Well, folks have different opinions on that, but I'll tell you, when Republicans were together the most, when we were together the most is when we were conservatives. When we presented a vision that said, you know what, We can't spend and borrow ourselves to prosperity. And we all say that. But the question is, do we vote that way? And when we did cut, cap, and balance, that's when we were most together. We had this president in a way he could not escape. We should have said, you know, there is no debt increase unless there's real spending increases. But no, the spending decreases. Yeah, I've been here a little bit too long. So we had that opportunity. I think we let it roll forward. But at least we forced that debate. You know, in the last Congress, they didn't even have debates on raising the debt ceiling.
And Clayton, let me add to that. The other time that we had a great showing from the conservative movement is when we presented Paul Ryan's budget to the House of Representatives. And literally for the first time in my lifetime, we did something serious to protect and preserve entitlement programs and fix them so they are around for the next generation. You can criticize the plan, but you can't do it with nothing. And rationing healthcare is not an answer that works, and the other side has no beef. And we got 240 votes for Paul Ryan's budget. That's an amazing accomplishment when we knew what would run into in the Senate. Some folks who have very difficult congressional districts, who won as freshmen in districts that the President Obama carried by a substantial margin, did the right thing and supported that piece of legislation. I think it's remarkable. When we present that conservative legislation, we get the people supporting us.
And I'm a good follow-up to Mike's comments because I came from one of those districts. Do you know what it's like to be a conservative in New York? But I am here to tell you, and I voted against, I voted for cut, cap, and balance, but the Budget Control Act I thought was not the right way to go for this country. I think what we need to do a better job of, and this is the challenge for all of you as well as for us, we need to let the American people know that our principles, it's not a Republican or a Democratic or conservative, our principles, the principles upon which this country was founded are the right way to go. It's what will get this country out of this economic quagmire that we're in. It's what will energize this nation, what will instill the American dream for all of us and get that back going. So we've got to do a better job. We're right on this issue. We're right on these principles. This whole argument with HHS, it's a First Amendment issue. Don't let anyone tell you it's anything but a First Amendment issue and an assault on our First Amendment rights. But we've got to do a better job.
You spoke about being a conservative in New York. What do you hear from your constituents about how they view what has happened in the last year? We know what the media says, but what are your constituents saying to you, to each of you? And what do you hear from your colleagues, your freshman colleagues, in terms of how what they're hearing from their folks back home?
Well, I think, and again, this is because of the media and because of our opposition is so much louder than we are. I think more people in America think like you do, and in my district, which was a D+3 district on paper, but I think more Americans understand the fundamentals about this nation. They have that sense that things just aren't going right. And I think if we can make the argument that we've got the answers, we want less government, we want to reduce spending. I think if we can make that argument and we make it well, we'll get those people in the middle. And that's our challenge, and that's what we've got to do for 2012.
What do you hear politically from your colleagues?
Colleagues or constituents?
Both, either.
I come from a fairly conservative district
Exactly.
and blessed in that way, and I think a little bit different than New York. But no matter you're conservative, liberal, don't have a clue what's going on. This nation is in jeopardy. $16.4 trillion of debt. And I sit down with constituents and I talk about that. I talk about Medicare being bankrupt in as few as 6 years. And their eyes open up. Well, we haven't been told that. They're looking for solutions. This president promised everything in the world, and he's delivered 6 million more people into poverty, millions of Americans out of work. We have to present a vision. It's pretty amazing. A lot of folks in this town wring their hands about people don't trust Washington. Well, get a clue. But what is amazing is that Ronald Reagan said Washington was the problem, not the solution. And the trust in Washington. And at the end of his 8 years, the trust in Washington went up. Because the American people understand, if you trust them or you trust the bureaucrats, take your pick, and that's probably, hopefully, will be the decision that folks see in this election.
Congressman Pompeo, if you were speaker for a week, If you could be speaker for a week, what would you do?
You know, I think I would spend my time trying to do the same thing I do as a very junior member of Congress. I think it's our mission and the conservative movement's mission. It's the reason you all are here today to speak the truth about commitment to the Constitution and the principles in the Declaration of Independence. I would use that opportunity as speaker to gain as much attention I could to be committed to those very things. It's when we talk about those things, and it's great, when we get together as freshmen, we often turn to this. Talk about those principles. We have an obligation. We have sworn to the Constitution, right? That's what we did when we took an oath. It was the second time in my life that I had the privilege to do that. I would spend that time educating folks about what it means to have an enormous government where 1 out of 5 folks is dependent on the federal government, and what that means to your life and what it means to institutions like churches and to our charitable organizations when so much of our resources is sucked into this big beast in Washington, D.C., and how much it impacts them no matter where they are in life, no matter where they're stationed. This is not a government that is committed to those principles. We've moved a long ways, and I'd spend my time talking about that at every moment.
Congresswoman, what do you think is the biggest obstacle? Lots of obstacles I'm sure you've seen, and I'd be interested in hearing from all of you. What's the biggest obstacle to doing what you came here to do? Is it the White House and is it the president? Is it the Senate Democrats? Is it the Senate Republicans? Is it the House Democrats? Is it the House leadership, Republican leadership? Is it the media? What is it? What is it that is you consider, or something else, is the biggest obstacle to achieving what you came here to do?
Well, I think that probably all of the above, if I'm honest, that there are a lot of reasons. I think we fail as a conservative movement to get our message out. We've got to do a better job. So when we talk about any issue, this HHS rule that we've been debating so feverishly over the last few days, when we talk about it, we allow the opposition to take it to a contraceptive issue. It's not. It's a First Amendment issue. We have got to be vigilant about talking about principles, our vision for this country, and I think we don't do a good enough job of that. And of course, the reality of it is we're up against the media in many instances. That's the reality we have to deal with, the spin that's put on it, which is why the challenge goes to each one of you and to us. Educate your neighbors, your family, your mother, your sister, your cousins, one by one. This is the United States of America, and we must work so hard and fight to preserve her as we know her and love her.
And what do you think are the biggest challenges, Congressman?
Well, Mark Twain once said, he said, do the right thing, it would gratify some people and astonish the rest. And I kept telling my fellow freshmen, said, hey, let's just astonish Washington, just do what we said we'd do. And we did. We voted to repeal Obamacare. You know, we pledged, and we need to do that every month at a minimum.
Hear, hear.
Can we do that again? Why not do it again? That's an issue where we're winning on. Why don't we talk about it more? Do the right thing. And what I think bothers me the most is folks that go home and say, hey, we're going to do this thing, but then they don't follow through. You know, the Pledge to America, which is what all Republicans were under, said we cut $100 billion. $100 billion. That's a good start out of a $1.4 trillion deficit. The end result of what we finally passed as a budget was we cut about $1 for every American. That's not good enough. It's not good enough to say I tried. You got to keep trying. We got to keep fighting because this is just not about the election. It's not about the next election. It's about the next generation. And that's what we ought to focus on.
Congressman?
Clearly the biggest obstacle to achieving what the 87 freshmen wanted to come do resides at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Absolute, total absence of leadership. I remember this HHS issue brings it up again, right? This is a president who talked about us clinging to our guns and our religion. Count me a clinger. This is a president with a deep antipathy to what we're trying to do and who has a series of policies that have been destructive all across the country and certainly in Kansas as well. He has opposed every single limited government measure that the House has put forward this year. Some so much that we're even too timid to present them. And so we need an enormous change in the White House.
Well, now, when you say too timid to present them, you mean that the leadership, the Republican leadership, is afraid to present them because of being fear of being attacked by the media?
I'll say too timid. All of the above in the sense of collectively. I mean, look at the payroll tax battle that we had. The House put out it wouldn't have been my first draft, but it was a reasonable presentation that would have extended some of these crazy things for more than just a couple of months, for a year, and in one case, 2 years. And yet, while we did it, we took our vote, we got it done, we all went home, and within hours, the United States Senate had collapsed. Good conservatives had voted for a 2-month extension on a piece of ridiculous legislation. We all came back to Washington, D.C. and said, not again. And so here we sit now with February deadline, and I'm very concerned about what we'll do because we haven't been able to successfully articulate our vision for how to move forward with unemployment insurance and the payroll tax. So it's been a combination of things that have caused us to lose some very, very important battles.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm a former state legislator, and, you know, I always thought that it would be the House members, the conservative House members and the conservative senators working together to have a plan. And do you do that? Do you work across not just party lines, you know, forget that, but working across the other side of the rotunda to get a plan that the House and Senate conservatives can all agree on and try to stand firm on? Do you do much of that?
There is some of that, but not nearly enough in my
and
opinion.
And you've done that before in the state legislature.
Yeah, I've served and had that opportunity, but that gets lost. That gets lost. But oftentimes I see it's not the divide between the House and Senate. It's the folks that have been here a little bit longer. And this place tends to, that's why we need you engaged. To push folks to say, no, what? You said you were a conservative. Where are your principles? Where are your solutions? What are you doing about it? Like Paul Ryan, I have the opportunity to serve on his budget committee, said last night, this election is not just about beating this president, and that it is. It is about setting up a choice, because we have had 60 years of liberal policies that have broken down our culture, broken down our families, broken down our society. There are some tough choices to be made. People have to be ready for those choices.
What about that?
I would say, and you're going to be seeing it as the Republicans put out their budget. We'll get right into the same debate. It will be spun that we want to get rid of Medicare. We want to cut Medicare for seniors. We don't care about seniors. And I want you to please be aware and pay attention to what will happen with that. If the Republicans, just like last year, the budget we put out is bold, and it's a realization that we cannot stay with the status quo, because Medicare, Social Security, all the rest, they're bankrupt already. So we need to put out a vision. We did that last year. We'll do it this year. And our goal needs to be educate the American people. The health care law is what will destroy Medicare. The health care law cut Medicare by $500 billion. That's the kind of education that we need to continue to getting out there and saying, our vision is the right vision for this country.
Congressman Pompeo, what are you as freshmen and what is the House going to do this year, an election year? And what can we do, what can these people here, people watching us, what can we do to help hold the House members accountable to the things that all of you have said you came to Washington to do?
Well, we'll do lots of important things that are narrow. I'm confident that we will pass legislation that undoes what the president did with respect to religious freedom. I'm confident we'll move that forward. But I think one of the most important tasks we'll take on this year is, again, passing a budget. Going through the process and articulating priorities. It's what the federal government just has never done. It's never said, well, this is how much money we have, and so that's how much money we're going to spend. And I'm hopeful we'll do that. I hope we'll take on another piece of entitlement reform. Look, we know we can count votes in the Senate too, although I will tell you I do not understand that institution. If anyone does, please come see me later. We don't have the votes there, so we recognize that. But it is nonetheless incredibly important that we continue the mission that the three of us all came to do and continue to march towards that objective. And then, when we get the votes in the Senate and the White House, I am counting on the fact that we will continue to do those things in the future.
Well, Republicans had the White House and both houses of Congress for 8 years. So what do we say, or well, I guess 6 years, basically. But so what do we say to people when we say, well, yeah, if you wait till you get the presidency and you wait till you have the House and Senate, well, you know, not so much less time.
Cleta, let me take that first. I get that question all the time from my good conservative friends is, hey, what will be different in January 2013, even if we're successful in the electoral process as we hope to be? That's where you all come in. That's the importance. It is absolutely the case. The first thing we have to do, I think, as conservatives is admit that when we had the levers of power before, we failed. And the American people spanked us in 2006 and 2008. But we marched together in November of 2010. We all need to be held accountable. It's easier to vote for some of these things, frankly, when you know they're not going to become law. I hope, and it's my fervent prayer for that next generation, that when we have them, we'll continue to do the right thing.
I think Tim mentioned earlier about trust, and we lost the American people's trust, so thus the Tea Party, there was a lack of trust with Republicans and the Democratic administrations. So I think what we need to do, if we are successful in when we are successful in getting the Senate and the White House back, what we need to do is be faithful to the American people, to do what we said we would do, and that is restore principles to this nation.
Do you get a lot of pressure as freshmen? Do you get a lot of pressure from the House Republican leadership to say, hey, just go with us this time, this is the best we can do? Or is there a countervailing force from them that says, you know we're not going to get this through the Senate, so we're going to put forth the strongest, most conservative platform we can? I mean, which do you see coming most out of the Republican leadership in the House or the Senate?
That's a great question. It's really seems to be a mixed bag. And I learned early on, if you told them no, if you said I'm going to cut spending rather than flatline, they eventually say, well, we're not going to lobby them anymore. But I had the opportunity. I had 70 town halls last year. I just tell you, the frustration is incredible out there. You know why? Because we're not doing what we said we'd do. That's pretty clear. And we're not taking up the challenge to fight against this president's vision. And it's a vision that's radically different than the history of this country. And we can fight, but let's fight if we're going to lose. And that's what I continue to hear, and that's what the American people, that's what Kansans tell me every day.
Do they say that in New York?
They do. Regardless of how liberal one perceives New York as being, and it is, I think that you're seeing a movement in New York illustrated by how many seats we picked up in the 2010 Congress. We picked up 6 congressional seats. Because, again, it's not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's an issue of what works. And we are losing 2 congressional seats in New York because of the policies and the regulations and the taxes in New York. So we need to look at how we're doing business there and change the mindset and the principles upon which we stand and we believe our nation stands on. That's what's going to turn this around, and that's why I think even in New York we will follow that direction.
Congressman?
Yeah, sure. There's lots of pressure. I will tell you, I always in my mind take just a little bit of joy, though, in remembering each time I see her referring to her as Minority Leader Pelosi. It's one of life's simple pleasures. And I am counting on the same title next time. There's lots of pressure to try and get to the place which gets the best policy that you can achieve given the conditions in which you find yourself. It's one of the things I've heard my colleagues talk about frustration. I characterize it a bit differently, but we do recognize that without leadership in the White House for the conservative movement, that the real goals, the enormous changes we need, are just unlikely to occur. And so the battle continues.
So wrap up, a few seconds. What do you charge this audience and conservatives to go out of here and do? What specifically, besides believing strongly, what can they do?
This is the election of a lifetime. And I firmly believe that I have 4 young children. And you look them in the eye, and I want them to remember that 2012 was when Daddy said, you know what? Or you said, you know what? The future of this nation was at stake, and you want to be able to tell them, what did you do when they asked you? You want to say, I fought for the conservative principles, because that's what we need to be fighting for. We need to save this country. It fundamentally is about the next generation, and that's what I would like for you to think as you're engaged in that battle.
And I would echo Tim's comments this election is for the very United States of America. I do believe we have one last chance in 2012 to reclaim this country and to get her back from the brink at which she teeters right now. Each one of you, you're here, you're engaged. You are, Ronald Reagan said, if you can't find a hero, you're looking in the wrong places. I look out here today and I say, these are folks who love their country and who want to make things right. But we've got to communicate our message to others. Again, as I said earlier, your neighbors, your family, your friends, get them engaged, get people registered to vote, help educate them on how to vote. And we will get this country back. I am optimistic. America is made up of great Americans, people just like yourselves.
Yeah, not much more to add. As a former soldier, I always think about it as send us more troops. Send us a handful more senators. Send us a president in the White House. And when I say send, don't just send Republicans, send conservatives, and we'll get this done.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a